Europe has been noticing a rise in anti-Christian attacks over the last 10 years. Last Saturday, a fire ripped through the Gothic cathedral in Nantes, France. The cause and motive remain under investigation. Last year, French government officials recorded 966 anti-Christian acts. That is an average of nearly 3 per day. Joining us now with more analysis on this topic is Luke Coppen, European editor for Catholic News Agency. Luke, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
So, Luke, why do you think there has been a rise in anti-Christian attacks in Europe?
Well, this is a complicated question because in many cases we don't know the identity of the perpetrators of these acts against churches across Europe. I discussed this with Ellen Fantini, who's the director of the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe. And she told me that she believed that the rise was a result of an increase in activity among radicalized movements within Europe. And she said that these movements were both secular and religious in nature, and they ran the whole range from anarchists to Islamists. And each of the groups had a different reason for wanting to target churches. And this made it very complicated to tackle the issue because the perpetrators are so diverse.
Obviously, very disturbing to say the least. Luke, are governments acknowledging this trend?
They're starting to, but only because the problem has become unignorable, particularly in France. There are just such a huge number of attacks now, up to 3 a day on average, so the authorities just can no longer ignore it. So, for example, last weekend, when we saw the fire at Nantes Cathedral, both the French president and the Prime Minister issued statements expressing their concern about it. So it shows that at the highest levels of government now, officials are beginning to take this seriously. But church authorities feel that there is much more to be done in order to safeguard churches.
And what about the church? How is the church responding to the cities that were attacked?
So the church is responding broadly in 2 ways. On the one side, you have the bishops, particularly in France, who are increasingly vocal about this issue. And whenever they meet government ministers, they call for greater protection for churches. They're seeking a security plan that would increase protections. But on the other side, and perhaps more interestingly, you have lay movements rising up, groups of people who are no longer willing to tolerate these attacks on their churches. There's a movement called Protect Your Church in France, in which Catholics, many of them young, visit their churches at night in order to send out the message that attacks mustn't happen here. And they're proving quite effective. And Ellen Fantini, who I mentioned earlier, has suggested that they could be a model for communities around the world who are facing similar problems.
Well, look, we don't have much time left, but I'm curious, what does this ongoing vandalism, what does it say about Europe's attitude towards religious tolerance?
Well, in theory, religious freedom is enshrined in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. But over the past few years, critics have said that in practice, religious liberty is shrinking. They cite such cases as a Finnish member of parliament who was investigated simply for tweeting a passage from the Bible. And another case in which 2 Swedish midwives were no longer allowed to practice their profession because they refused to participate in abortions. So they take these cases as examples of how religious freedom in practice is becoming increasingly difficult to uphold. And and alongside this, we also have this increase in radicalized movements, which are growing all across Europe, on both left and right, and both secular and religious. And these 2 things together are kind of squashing religious liberty in Europe.
Well, Luke, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this subject. We really appreciate it. Luke Coppen, European editor for Catholic News Agency. Thanks again, Luke.
Okay, thank you very much.